Hey guys, Zane from the Infinite Jukebox here with another album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Thantifaxath record, Hive Mind Narcosis. When Thantifaxath debuted with their 2011 self-titled EP before following it up in 2014 with Sacred White Noise, their first full-length studio album, the Canadian band immediately proved that they happened to be one of the more interesting bands that modern black metal had to offer. They also proved that they were one of the harder bands to pronounce the name of, especially in the context of a review, where the reviewer may or may not feel a bit under pressure to constantly pronounce a band with a complex name correctly. And, that's been a bit of a struggle for this hypothetical reviewer who constantly had to say their name over and over before recording this to make sure that they actually got it right. But that's just a bit of a hypothetical situation, of course. And as such, generally speaking, although they haven't been the most popular band in the world, they've always been very, very promising. Their ability to mix together complexity with catchiness in a genre where most bands fall on one end of the spectrum or the other immediately made them stand out in the context of black metal. However, it didn't really feel like they were an essential band to hear for black metal fans, at least not for a while, not until the 2017 EP Void Masquerading as Matter, a phenomenal EP, one of the best EPs of that year, so on and so forth. It was with this release that they managed to really perfect the aforementioned style of complexity meets catchiness, as well as finding more of their own identity as a band, and ultimately the result was something that increased the hype for them to a huge extent, at least within certain corners of the black metal community. Hive Mind Narcosis is a fantastic return for them to a full-length LP format, as well as arguably the single most conceptually successful release under the Thantifaxath name to date. And considering they've done some great stuff in the past, that's saying something. Like I said, there is a major degree of complexity to be found within the world of Thantifaxath's music that makes them a bit of a kind of complex prog rock band in a way. My point is, it's pretty seamless, yet still essential to the sound that makes them, well, them. Terms and phrases like dissonance are often thrown around to describe what a band like Thantifaxath attempts to achieve, and a lot of times people will accuse them of being avant-garde, but the truth is that dissonance and avant-garde, among other similar synonyms, aren't really proper descriptors for Thantifaxath as a band, at least not to the same extent that they are comparable to some of the more abstract black metal bands out there. Rather, it just feels like everything that they do is meticulously crafted. Despite the rawness that stems simply from the kind of music that Thantifaxath make, very raw black metal, as well as some extremely spacious, phenomenal production to be found throughout this record, it really does feel like the band have every single possible note that can be found here in the exact place that it needs to be. Again, it's raw, don't get me wrong, but not to the point it feels sloppy. Actually, it's the exact opposite. The album opener, Solar Witch, pretty much proves that straight off the bat, with its multiple different time signature changes, its different refrains, and interludes within interludes. It all just reeks of progressive sounds, but at the same time, it's a masterful take on progressive black metal, the exact kind of black metal that a band like Thantifaxath make. And while there are many different bands doing that particular sound right now in a variety of ways, it's rare to come by a band doing it as easily as Thantifaxath are. It really kind of almost feels effortless, despite the fact that an album like this takes unbelievable amounts of effort to put together. It also means that it leads to the record itself feeling about as essential as it possibly could, as far as listening to it from front to back goes. I mean, you can cherry pick a song or two off of this if you want, I suppose. I mean, there was even a single off of this record, so you can't really say that the band don't want you to do that, but at the same time, with the very thought out and generally well processed compositions being found here, it kind of feels like it's asking for you to listen to it from front to back. So even if you aren't someone who's the kind of person keen to listen to something from beginning to end all the time, I feel like you probably should for this one. It really does feel as if every single thing here is meant to be the way it is, and by removing a part of it, you're really cheapening your own listening experience. I mean, there really is no filler here. I mean, seemingly Thantifaxath just have no time for filler or anything of the sort, but then again, you also wouldn't have time to create any filler songs when you're already busy putting together 7 incredibly well-composed, extremely dense sonic tracks that are kind of amazing, if I'm being totally honest. I mean, generally speaking, this is the kind of record that has a huge amount of effort put into it. It's not exactly the most amazing, mind-blowing thing in the world in terms of innovation. Again, there are other bands doing this particular form of black metal out there today that you can certainly find being fairly popular to even extremely popular in metal circles, but at the same time, Thantifaxath's ability to do it in general is just really impressive. They execute it flawlessly. With that in mind, Thantifaxath also don't really let themselves be defined by the complex compositions being put on display here, and of course, this is pretty integral to why they even stand out as a band in the first place. There are plenty of incredibly progressive or progressive-oriented black metal bands active today, and there have been plenty in the past as well, so the question remains, why is this one special? The answer to that question is just that they're able to compose songs in a way that is complex, certainly, but also distinctly memorable, and at times legitimately catchy, which ultimately results in them being in this somewhat odd but not necessarily bad space between being very marketable to your casual metalhead or even someone who's just really touching the surface of black metal, as well as diehard black metal fans that will willingly check out pretty much anything that sounds like it's lo-fi. I'm not necessarily saying that this record's lo-fi, far from it, but there are plenty of black metal fans out there whose favorite black metal albums sound like they were recorded in a cave, and I can testify because I am one of those people. Generally speaking, songs like Burning Kingdom of Now, for example, are really just built around structures that are memorable, for lack of a better term. They have progressions that feel distinctly, well, distinct. They are songs that feel so well composed that they sort of swirl around in your mind as long as you're the kind of person with the mindset willing to let a black metal song get stuck in your head. I mean, that's not for everybody, of course, but for those who can relate to that, then this is certainly an album that will do exactly what I just said. It really is kind of an interesting case. I mean, on one hand, black metal, similar to other forms of extreme metal, if you will, like death metal or even grindcore, is very much plagued by a number of artists who have great ideas that are weighed down by constant unnecessary blast beat drumming or guitar work that sounds purposefully dissonant when in fact it's just plain bad, and vocal work that was recorded raw in like the bathroom of a YMCA, I'm pretty sure, which ultimately just results in something that sounds terrible. And while there are great lo-fi albums out there, there are just as many that are downright horrible and nigh unlistenable. But on the other hand, you also have a constant stream of progressive metal, be it progressive metal in a traditional form, progressive death metal, progressive black metal, which is so focused on instrumentation and complexity and structure and music theory that it ultimately just doesn't maintain any soul. In a way, despite the complete differences between these two opposite styles, they are both similar in one way. They have one thing on the overlapping part of their respective Venn diagram, which is that they both lack identity and ultimately just tend to blend into the crowd more than anything. If you are a somewhat jaded metal fan at this time, then you'll probably have the mindset that most new black metal that comes out and most new progressive metal that comes out will face those exact problems that I've just depicted, but Thantifaxath are the sort of antithesis of both of these tropes in a strange way, as they manage to stand strong as a tightly performing band that is just as great in the creativity department as they are in the general structure department. They are incredibly impressive performers just from a general compositional standpoint. Their musical chops are seriously in the spotlight here. It's utterly phenomenal in its best moments. But at the same time, if you also want something that just feels raw and it just feels like just plain human emotion put in black metal form, then this is also a highly recommendable record for you. It kind of manages to please both worlds, which is something that you don't really see often, despite the fact that many people do admittedly try to take a stab at it. A lot of times it just doesn't succeed, and here is something that succeeds in doing so beautifully. There's also a pretty hefty amount of atmosphere to be found throughout the entirety of Hive Mind Narcosis as well, which is equally nice to see. This is most primarily seen on some of the more ambience-focused tracks on the record, which primarily consist of songs like Sublilith Tunnels, as well as Surgical Utopian Love. It's songs that are kind of focused more on this ambient side of things while still being hugely metal-based tracks, and this ambience and atmosphere can come in different forms from song to song. In some cases, it may be some of those aforementioned interludes and bits that I was talking about before, but on the other hand, in the case of some songs, such as the previously mentioned Sublilith Tunnels, it can just be the entire length of the track that's based around world building sonically. Mind you, there is a song or two here that doesn't really feel particularly strong as far as the ambience goes, but at the same time, it's not necessarily something that ruins the album. It may not be consistent through and through, and I will say that some songs like The Lost Wisdom of Wolves is not necessarily the best example of how great atmosphere can be in the context of progressive black metal, but at the same time, they are still impressive songs all the same from a compositional standpoint. The atmosphere that's built here feels thick, but at the same time, it's not dense enough to be completely inaccessible for those that have yet to explore the furthest corners of black metal. This isn't some sort of album by a completely different metal band known for its density, say Cryptopsy or Devourment. This is a totally different thing altogether, and while the atmosphere here is very powerful, it's also not enough that it feels violently oppressive or anything like that if you aren't 100% totally prepared. If I'm being totally honest, in a somewhat shocking fashion, Hive Mind Narcosis kind of feels like the most easily accessible thing that Thantifaxath have done to date, and while some people may not feel that way, and other people may feel that way and cry sellout because of that, I personally think that it's a more than pleasant surprise. I mean, really, the band have been on a sort of pro-focus on sonic environment trajectory for some time now, basically since their first EP at this point, but at the same time, it's great to hear them just swiftly put together a fantastic atmosphere that is just as heavy as it is kind of engrossing, and generally speaking, Hive Mind Narcosis is very easy to get into, yet at the same time, it's just as easy to get massively lost in, which is just a lovely revelation of how great this band can be in their best moments. I mean, if I'm being really honest, Canada have a lot of great black metal bands out there right now. I mean, it may not be the black metal capital of the world, and, well, it's never been and probably never will be if I'm being totally honest, but at the same time, there's a lot of great Canadian black metal bands out there. Yet, all the same, I would argue that very few, if any, can really argue to have the same staying power and the same impact in a relatively short period of time and in a relatively small discography than Thantifaxath have had over the course of just a few releases. I mean, despite only putting out 2 full-length albums and 2 EPs in the course of over a decade, they still have a huge cult fan base behind them that is happily lifting them up to the top of the metal world, or at least about as close to it as you can possibly get without being very, very, very applicable to the mainstream. But this isn't Avenged Sevenfold, don't worry. It kind of only makes sense that this record manages to pick up where Sacred White Noise left off on the hype, at least, as it really does see Thantifaxath just do what they do best, while also dialing up some of their best qualities, such as song structuring and complex performances, while still being impassioned, up tenfold, basically. Really, everything about this just feels like an improved version, or at least an improved take on a lot of what they've done in the past. I genuinely do think that this is the best thing the band have done to date, and it's only further proof that not only are they one of the most promising black metal bands out there right now, but they are also one of the most important to look out for, as this band could arguably change the subgenre as a whole depending on what they choose to do next artistically. I'm going to give this record 4 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this album review. I've been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.